Um, my name's Jake Hayman, and I'm the CEO of the Social Investment Consultancy. We've been working with Family Lives and CAN for a little while on looking at the different revenue opportunities for organisations in the sector and trying to find ways in which we can give advice and guidance around issues such as achieving financial sustainability, which is the subject that we're going to be talking about today. As I understand it, everyone's able to type into a chat box, which comes up on my screen. So if you do have any questions as we go, then please do type them into the chat box, or we can try and find a way to enable people's audio functions if we like, and then we'll have a full Q&A at the end. But what I wanted to do was to get going with an overview of some of the key things that we think are important to achieving financial sustainability, and bring in a bit of a case study of a made-up organisation that will hopefully give some flavour and some insight into the ideas that we're talking about, some of the risks, some of the challenges, and some of the opportunities. So to start off with, if anyone has any problems, please do type them into the chat, and otherwise we will get moving with the webinar, which will last an hour, including the Q&A. So we'll speak for about 40 minutes or so. No questions? Okay, we're good to go. Perfect. So when we're thinking about financial sustainability, I think the key strategic questions that we're talking about are where are we now as an organisation? Where do we want to go? What are our short and long-term organisational goals? What are our financial needs? And how are these going to change over time according to our goals? So what kind of models do we need to be working off in order to make sure that we're set up to reach our financial and strategic goals? And then start thinking about finance and where it comes through. So are our current income sources sustainable? Are they scalable? Are they going to be the right income sources to suit our future needs? And are we looking for the investment in order to get us from A to B so that we can reach a level of sustainability through different or improved income sources? Are we looking at generating our own revenue through sales? Are we looking at grant finance, and is that grant finance an ongoing subsidy for programming? Is it a complete sponsorship of our activities, or is it a small amount of grant finance to be used like investment to help us get through a period where we're not making enough money to get us to the point where we can make enough of our own money? And then what kind of additional resources do we need to dedicate to bring in more or alternative income, or to shore up our business model as it stands? So those are the kind of key questions that we're looking at when we're considering financial sustainability. And what I want to do is make today's session as practical as possible. So to dive into a case study that allows us to address three key areas that I think are the most important areas when we're looking at this topic. And they are looking at how we manage growth, how we manage risk, and how within the context of managing growth and managing risk, we maintain our focus and don't lose our way. And what we're seeing at the moment is a number of organizations trying to grow and not feeling capable of doing so, or feeling threats to exactly how they're going to continue their current programming, and a number of organizations afraid of losing big contracts, or being threatened with losing big contracts, or indeed having lost big contracts that might really challenge them and challenge their current models. And also, how do we maintain the focus of the organization and make sure that we don't sacrifice what we're doing here in order to ensure that we can continue. I just got a question through from Jennifer about getting the slides afterwards, and yes, we're going to happy to share the slides, and I think the whole webinar is also going to be up on a YouTube, but you can have the slide deck also, no problem. So to start off with, we're going to talk about managing growth, and we're going to look at three key areas of managing growth. The first is around pricing and how we cost the work that we do. The second is around business development and how we reach out to new customers. And the third is around upselling and how do we maximize the current relationships we have and the current customers we have in order to get more income out of them. So I'm going to pop up on the screen a case study about an organization we've made up called Forever Families. And I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to reflect on it. But basically, the organisation is a charity. They're based in North Yorkshire, and they're working with young people aged 4 and 5 and their families on behavioural challenges. They're doing this work in nurseries and primary schools. And it's based on the founder, Tim's experience as a primary school teacher and academic research that he's read and reviewed into children's development and psychology. So the organisation is a small organisation. He earns about £20,000 a year through selling 100 in-school sessions per year. This is the equivalent of 10 schools buying 10 sessions for £200 each. So he doesn't have 100 different school clients. He's got a mixture of different schools buying different numbers of sessions, but it's closer to 10 than it is to 100. And then they also earn an extra £5,000 a year from an sponsored annual fundraising event. It's a London to Brighton bike ride, and that 5,000 combines with his 20,000 to make what is effectively Tim's income and a bit of cash going towards the financial controls and reporting and things and materials for the charity. And Tim's very frustrated. When he started out, lots of people were excited about his model, and he thought he wanted to earn £50,000 per year for himself and then hopefully grow to employ other people. And yet here he is earning £20,000 with £5,000 to run his organisation, and which is much less than he wanted, and he's already at capacity. So he thought that he could work 200 billable days, we call them, days where he's charging for his time a year, and set his price at £250 for a half-day session. Schools, however, really pushed him and said, well, if it's £250 for a half-day session and we want to buy 5 of them or 10 of them or 15 of them, then shouldn't we get a discount? And Tim thought that was fair and understood that that was what they wanted. And so he ended up pricing most of his sessions at an average of £200 a session. So his costs dropped. And the feedback from schools has been great. And he's got interest from more schools, but he's at capacity and he's got no money to hire. He's not exactly sure where all his time's gone. He's not exactly sure why he's not earning as much as he thought he would be. And he doesn't know how to get from where he is now to where he wanted to be, which was his £50,000 salary and an organisation that could grow and run his programme in multiple schools. So that's the case study that we're going to look at as we go through the organisation, and you'll see that for those of you running bigger organisations over the years, Forever Families is going to grow, and so its challenges will change slightly. Does anyone have any questions about the case study or anything, or can I dive into some of our analysis of the challenges that Tim's facing? Feel free to type any questions at any time. So the question Tim came to us with was what to do. And the first thing that I'd suggest to Tim when looking at something like this is thinking about his pricing. And I think he's made a couple of mistakes that make it much more difficult for him to be successful and in his planning. I think the first one was the suggestion that he could do 2 sessions a day. So he thought he could do he could just bill a half-day session for half the price that he'd like to charge for a full day of work. And I think that we all know that when we're running a half-day session somewhere, or doing half-day consultancy, or for us, if it's doing a 1-hour webinar, it's never that amount of time, because there's the travel time to get there. There's the fact that it exhausts you to do a half-day workshop. There's all of the prep, there's all of the follow-up. And what Tim's done is failed to be realistic about the amount of time it's really going to take. So being realistic about the hours involved and not being realistic about the hours involved has undermined Tim's business model. So his idea that he'd be able to do a half-day session in half a day of work, and theoretically be able to do 2 a day, was madness. He was never going to be able to do that. And that meant that all of his assumptions about the amount of work he'd be able to do a year, the number of sessions he'd be able to do a year, went out the window very early on. And it's a common mistake that consultants make in my field. It's a common mistake people in the charity sector make, which is to underestimate the amount of time involved in any given project and not really spell out, including the travel time, including the preparation time, including the follow-up time, how long a session would take. So if I were him, I'd look at something like a half-day session in a school and think that I was looking at least 2 days of work in order to deliver that half-day session. And of course, once you start at 2 days of work to deliver that session, you can understand why doing 100 of these sessions a year, he's already feels at capacity, because that's 200 days work a year, which is basically a full working year. And that's just delivering the projects. That's not even running his business and so on and so forth. The way that we normally look at pricing is to have a multiple of either 3 or 4 in order to achieve how much you should charge for your time. So if I wanted to earn £50,000 a year, as Tim does, then generally what I would do is divide 50,000 by 220, the number of work days, and it gets you about £225 per day is your cost. And that's fine, but that's not necessarily what you then charge yourself out at. What I would do would then be to multiply that number by 3 for a sole trader business, so an organization where it's just you and you don't have any employees, or multiply it by 4 for an organization that is one that you're looking to grow. So that means that if I'm a sole trader business and I know that I want to earn £225, the equivalent of £225 per day, I have to charge 3 times that each time I do a piece of work. And the reason we say 3 times is because each piece of work takes as long to market as it does to deliver, and you need to spend as much time managing your business as you do delivering your work. And so that would mean that someone in Tim's position who just wanted to tick along on their own salary should not be charging his £250 a session, but should be charging £600 or £700 a session a day. And that's a really important starting point for this. And the reason that we increase to a multiple of 4 when we're looking at an organization, so if you're either in a big organization or a sole trader looking to grow, or you've got a couple of staff, is that the 4th multiple would be for growth. Because if Tim does charge his multiple and works this number of days a year, then he'll make his money, he'll make his salary, but he'll have no money left at the end of the year. And so how does he ever get to the point where he can guarantee someone's income? How does he ever build up the reserves to hire another staff member? You need to leave the same multiple again for profit. So again, if it was a sole trader, Tim might want to charge £600 to £700 a day. And then if he was looking to grow an organization, it would be closer to £900 a day. And that's what you need to be able to charge in order to grow an organization. Now, in the case something like Tim's, it may be that he's got loyal custom and he doesn't need to spend quite as much on marketing or quite as much time as managing his business. But this is a good litmus test to start with. and gets us much closer to the ballpark of what we really need to be pricing at. And anyone who say sample pie chart with a couple of examples of how much we'd suggest people charge their time at, depending on different salary expectations for either sole traders or for consultancy type organizations, where you're running trainings or giving advice in schools or running sessions in schools or working with local authorities, whatever it may be. We're happy to send a couple of example pricing models over afterwards, so please just get in touch with Family Lives. I think the other thing that Tim didn't realize is that he started with what he thought would be a fair price. So he thought he wanted his £250 a day. And what he didn't realize is that everyone negotiates. And so whatever price you start at, whether it be fair or unfair, people are going to try and knock some off. And he also didn't realize that everyone loves a bargain. And it's much easier to start high and drop down than it is to start at the price that you think is the lowest you can do, because then people will still push you from there. And so what's happened to Tim is that he's said that he needs £250 per session from the schools, but then the schools have asked for discounts, and he's thought that's kind of fair because he's selling lots at a time, but he didn't have any margin to give. And so it's really eating into what he should be charging. And what he would have been much better off doing, even if he hadn't started at an infinitely higher price, is to start at £300 and then be prepared to drop down to £250, and that way the school still feels like it gets a bargain, but he ends up with the price that he needs. And I think that that's one of the really important things to be able to do. Just as a kind of rule of thumb, if you were to hire in a consultant to undertake trainings for you, I think I've put up on here that about 150 more than 100 days per year as a consultant is really unlikely. So typically a consultant might work 100 to 150 days a year. As a manager, when you've got staff and you're running projects as well as delivering, then you're looking at 60 to 80 days per year. So we've written here that to earn £50,000, Tim needs to bring in £500 a session. So we'd have suggested starting at a £600 price and offering a bulk discount to some people at £450, and then ending up with the £500 average. But in realistic terms, in order to grow his organization, he's going to have to be moving up to £1,000 per session. And I think that undercharging is the biggest challenge that many people face in the charity sector, underestimating the number of hours, underestimating the cost per person, and not factoring in sufficient money to either run your organization or to allow for growth, are the real things that hold back too many charities. And so I think that getting the pricing model in the first instance is what sets organization up to grow. So thinking through potential scenarios, even if Tim were to increase his client base by 50% to 150 schools and to double their cost, they still can't afford to run with a staff member because they'd only have £75,000 coming in. So it's important when you're thinking about your financial modelling to go through and say, even if I'm successful here, am I going to get to the place that I need to be? Because in Tim's case, even with great success and increasing the cost, he's never going to get to where he wants to get to. Jane's asked about competitive markets and how we manage to keep costs up or put costs up when we're being pushed to reduce. And I think that's a really interesting question, which brings me on nicely to how do you do this, which is the final point here and the next slide. So we've really got 3 or 4 options here. One is to just increase the price outright, because in fact the market could handle it, and what Tim had done was just made a strategic mistake in starting at his bottom price and then negotiating. Or we need to increase the perceived value so that people become happy to pay more for this particular service. At the moment, they value it at £200 or £250, and we need to get them to value it at £500 or £1,000. How do we do that when it's the same service? Or we need to diversify so that we are backing up a service that's never going to make any money because the market just isn't going to pay for it, or it's a completely very competitive market. And so we need to diversify and bring in other products. And I think Jane's question is important, because we have to be honest about this stuff, and you can't just say, well, we'll just whack our prices up, because if people won't pay for it, then they just won't pay for it. But if they won't pay for it, then it may be that there isn't a business model that allows you to earn the amount you want to earn at the higher end and build a business that brings in staff and focus on just delivering your current product. And so doing the market analysis and being realistic about what the market can and can't handle is really, really important. So to talk a little bit about managing growth, perceived value, and diversification. So in terms of perceived value, there are a number of ways in which we can increase perceived value as an organization. One is building the brand, and investing in really making something look expensive. And it's amazing the difference people feel about someone who comes in with a flashy business card against a non-flashy business card, or has a smarter website, or is able to leave really high-end materials, as opposed to someone who's printed out a letter on in black ink on white paper and gives it out as a flyer. People subconsciously and consciously will imagine that the person with the cheaper marketing materials is offering a cheaper product, and therefore a product that you'd be prepared to pay less for. And this is why the higher end organizations do invest in obscene amounts of money in their business cards and their websites and their marketing documents. And you definitely don't need to invest in obscene amounts of money, but always looking at whether things could look smarter, and could have some investment in professional, high quality brand and design and marketing materials. I know we've worked with a couple of Family Lives members who have spent, £250, £500 on transforming their basic marketing documents into things that look really high end, super professional. And I think that will really pay dividends for them, because it may well allow them to increase their cost based on the perception that people have of them as they enter. So the brand and marketing documents is important. I think the idea of endorsements is really important, and one of the mistakes I think we make as salespeople is to say once we've sold to someone we can stop selling. We don't need to impress them anymore other than by delivering. And I think that those people who are successful in business, in social enterprise, in managing charity clients, are the ones who constantly reinforce their success by showcasing what they're doing with other people, the successes that they've had with other schools, in Tim's case, the superhead who gave the endorsement, the local press article about this work in another school, and constantly sending that information to their core client group. So regular updates, regular information, showing off about successes to people who have already hired you is a way to build the perceived value that they have of you, because they can see not just that you are someone who they've met and they like, but you're someone who someone else has met and someone else likes, someone who the superhead says is a fantastic person. And so finding a way to structure 3, 4, 5, 6 communications a year to your current client base, just to reinforce how well you're doing with other clients, and the growth of your organization is a really valuable way to increase perceived value. The other thing that we wanted to talk about today was around evidence and monitoring and evaluation. And this is something that a lot of organizations are struggling with. How much should we invest in this? Is it worth us doing it? Is it going to make a difference? And there's no right answer for it. But in terms of increasing perceived value, a lot of the time you'll have head teachers or local NHS trusts or police and crime commissioners who say, I sponsor this great program, but I don't have proof that it works. And those programs that do have proof that they work tend to command much higher value, even though it's the exact same program. So investing in third parties to come and do monitoring and evaluation work, or there are some fantastic pro bono ones out there. Family Lives may be able to put you in touch with some, but I know one of your members worked with Project Oracle, I think it was, who do pro bono monitoring and evaluation work for charities. And going through that work, even if you know it works and your clients are happy with it and the parents are happy with it and everything else, getting the evidence out there allows you to command a higher price for the work. And connected to that, even if you're not doing expensive third-party monitoring and evaluation, is client reporting, and just making sure to send regular updates to reaffirm the work that you've done with them, to tell the stories that they may already know, but can then share around internally and build up engagement across an organization, again, through an NHS trust or police and crime commissioner or a school or a college, making sure to remind them of what you've done for them, so that you're not seeing the head on day one and getting the work commissioned and then not seeing them for 12 months until you want to get the work commissioned again, and they don't really hear from you because you're working with their team. What you want is to be producing reporting, which is effectively your way of marketing your year two business. And this is why the business model question becomes more relevant, because a lot of people will say, well, I hardly spend any time on marketing, so I don't need as much in my budget for marketing as I do for project delivery. But actually, when you think about doing marketing in an aggressive way to your current client base, to improve perceived value amongst your current client base, as well as to reach out to new leads, it's something that you should be spending as much time on as you spend on project delivery. And so that's really important. And then just building relationships and making yourself part of the team, so that you become a fixture and fitting of the organization that you're serving or selling into, and or have a contract with, so that we can make sure that they couldn't imagine you leaving and see the cost of you being replaced as very high, and then having those conversations within that context about increases in price and what you need to charge, because it's not what you're trying to get out of them, but it's what you need to charge in order to keep your organization going and in order to serve them in a way that they need to be served. The other issue is around diversification. And again, generally with diversification, I'd focus in on how to leverage your core strengths in coming up with new products and services. But the first core strength that I'd start with is the pre-existing relationship with the current clients that you have. So can you have the conversation with your clients or with your donors or with whoever it is that you're generating your resources through, to say, what else are you buying that is connected to what I do? And then what else could someone like Tim sell? It may be that they're not yet buying anything else in the space, but could he sell a resource pack to go with the sessions that he's doing? Or could he sell a webinar service or something else that isn't the intensive travel out to the school, spend the half a day there, and then travel back, that exhausts him and takes up an entire day of his time every time he does it. And particularly once you're creating resource packs or membership programs, then you get to the point where you are making money as in your sleep, as they call it. So, you can have this resource pack, you post it up on a website, and one head teacher will log onto your website and buy it, and you will make a margin on it, without having to do anything. And those sorts of much higher margin products are great if there's a market for them. And that's why it's really important to go to your clients before you decide there's a market for them and test it and say, if I created just this resource pack, would you be interested in buying it? How much would you pay for it? And then you can figure out whether that's something that you want to go on to. So that was the first session on managing growth. And now we're going to move on to managing risk. And then we'll come on to the third point on maintaining focus. And then, as I say, stop for questions in 10-15 minutes time. So the three things that we wanted to talk about with regard to managing risk are around the revenue base and where that's coming from, the size of any given customer or donor, and the length of contracts. And these are really practical things that any organization can examine for themselves. So we do what we call a health check, which we've done for Forever Families here, to see what their potential risks are and where their money's coming from. And what we found out is that all of Forever Families funding comes from state primary schools, so all of the direct revenue that they're bringing in. And so it's just a single source, but it's not a single school, it's a single type of client they have. All Forever Families funding comes from one product, so they're just selling one product into one market. One school buys 50 sessions. So we said it was an average of 10. They've got 10 school clients, so one of them is buying half of all of the sessions they do each year. So they have one big client that's worth half of their business. Every September, they start with 0 guaranteed revenue because the schools aren't back yet, so they haven't negotiated their contracts for the year. And then on the other side of their work, where they get their £5,000, that comes from their sponsored fundraising event, which is fully funded by one donor. So the donor pays £3,000 to sponsor the event and does all the work around it, and then they get all of the proceeds, the £5,000. And Tim feels very guilty because every year he goes and asks the donor for the money again. So what do we think about Forever Families? Is this a healthy portfolio? Is it a high risk one? Is it something they should be worried about? Well, my analysis is that this is a really high risk portfolio, and we'll talk a little bit about why and what they can do about it. So the school focus, I don't think is the biggest problem. So the fact that they just sell to primary schools, sure, they can investigate. Could they sell into young offenders institutes, or could they sell into secondary schools, or could they sell into daycare centres? They can investigate that, and it would be good to broaden their customer base. But there are enough primary schools out there, and yes, you can monitor budgets at a primary school level, see what's happening with things like pupil premium and budget cutting and things. But generally, primary schools have enough money to afford something that's sub £5,000 in cost if they really want it, and definitely something that's sub £1,000 in cost if they really want it. The one thing that I would say is that this is an ongoing risk and will remain an ongoing risk, and should be considered when you're thinking about hiring. So if Tim did get his price up and wanted to hire people, well, he may well be working in one geographical area, and if that local authority had its funding cut, then would that pose a risk to the project across the entire local authority? Could that be a challenge? But I don't think focusing on primary schools is necessarily such a risk, but the opportunity to diversify is strong. The fact that there's a single product is an interesting one. So Tim's just selling one thing, and this is a something of a poisoned chalice, because if it's something that is not very lucrative, then there's less likely to be competition. But if it's something that's making a lot of money through your single product, then there's more likely to be competition. And it doesn't always work like that, but oftentimes it does. And I would suggest to someone like Tim, well, if his money and schools are buying this, and schools aren't so price sensitive about it in this instance, then he's going to have to continue to innovate to make sure that he's better than his competition. Otherwise, he'll start losing contracts, even to people who are charging more. Because if they're charging more but offering a better brand, a better style, more case studies, something that the school is really bought into, then he may well end up losing contracts. And oftentimes he'll lose contracts to people who can do multiple things. So they'll come and do the nursery and year 1 sessions, but they'll also do the years 2 to 6 sessions and offer a product solution there. So what Tim might want to do is either look at diversifying to offer other sessions that the school might be interested in buying if they're interested in procuring in that space, or teaming up with someone else who does sessions for years 2 to 6, so that he's got a complete solution between him and a partner. So having a single product, it's good. It means you can maintain focus, but it limits the amount of business you can do with any given organization and makes you much more susceptible to competition. The major risk that we see when looking at that is this fact that he's doing half of his business with one single school. And, you know, head teachers change, budgets cut, priorities change, and it's a real danger. And one of the things that a lot of people do in a situation comparative to Tim's is to not invest proportionally in that school. So they will say, well, I've got 10 school contacts, so I'll write them each a newsletter once a quarter. That's fine, but Tim's actually getting half of his business from one school. So actually half of his marketing energy and remarketing energy should be just focused on this one school. And so how can he invest in them proportionally? What can he do above and beyond delivering on the work in order to showcase them value? Can he write them an update every month rather than every quarter? Can he do an additional session for them? Can he come along and speak at a parents' evening? What is it that he can do to extra impress that single client? Because he needs to recognize that that is where his cash comes from in a practical sense. And if they are so important to him, then it's likely that he is also important to them. And so having the honest conversation about contracts and saying, could I seek a longer contract with you? Can we extend this to a 2 or 3 year contract? And even if that means discounting price and things, just to guarantee, because this is going to be the anchor for his whole organization and his whole outfit, I think it's a really valuable conversation to have, because the school will likely really value his work and not want to lose him. And if he's saying that I need to have this anchored down £10,000 a year of business from you for the next 3 years in order to guarantee I'm going to still be in business, then that can be really valuable. And obviously, if your biggest contract is the one you charge most for, then that's ideal. But there's also a model that says it's okay for Tim just to take his first £10,000 a year from this contract, even though he's not making any money, because that then empowers him to not making any profit on it, but it then empowers him to charge a bit more to everyone else without ever going hungry. Now, the biggest worry that we had looking at the health check was that there was zero guaranteed income at the start of the year. So the way Tim worked was he would pitch at the start of the year, get his contracts, work through to July, take a summer break, and then come and pitch again in September. But this meant that he would start with zero every September, and this is a real challenge. And particularly if he ever wants to grow, you simply can't take staff on when you've got no guaranteed income unless you've got a huge balance in the bank. So what we would have suggested would be to start the sales cycle much earlier. So looking in January, February, March, April, May, to sign as many contracts as possible for the following September, even whilst the current contract was running, and putting pressure on his clients to do that. Definitely looking at offering multi-year discounts in order to sign people up, or find a way to demand or suggest multi-year contracts. So if you're having a conversation with a client who says, well, I just want to hire you for 1 year, then you can turn around and say, well, actually, I only sell in 3-year blocks, but what I can do is do you a 3-year contract, but we'll have a 1-year break clause. So if you're not happy after a year, we'll walk away from it. But what that allows Tim to do is start the conversation in 12 months' time from a starting point that we're presuming we're going ahead, rather than a starting point that we need to start from scratch and pitch from scratch again. So I think looking at 2-3-year contracts is really where you want to be going, and offering break clauses gives people a way out, but oftentimes they don't end up using them. So you can offer the contract, put in the break clause, but send an automated invoice after 11 months or 10 months to start the program for the next year. And I think that that's a good way to deal with particularly very busy people in schools, police and crime commissioners, NHS trusts. Sign them up on that basis in the first instance and keep them to it. On the sponsored fundraiser that he has each year, I think it's really interesting that he has one donor, and because he's got one donor who sponsors it, he's never looked for any other money for it. Whereas what he could be doing is looking at second tier sponsors. So the headline sponsor is there, but let's find other people to also contribute. This is a sponsorship, it's not fundraising for a program. So it's okay to raise more costs. And if I were Tim, I would, rather than try and do a second fundraiser, really invest in trying to get second tier sponsorship for this fundraiser. So you've got your one sponsor who gives the £3,000 a year sponsorship, but then I would go out and try and find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10 £1,000 sponsors to be second tier sponsors. And also try and build up a relationship with the participants. So everyone who's cycling London to Brighton, invite them along to see a session one day, or offer to go and meet them, or host a meet up with them afterwards, so that you can pitch to them and ask them whether they'd become a regular monthly donor. And this kind of grant subsidy, by building relationships with people, really helps organisations in this space to get going while they're building up their revenue model. And also looking at corporate or trust and foundation programmatic subsidy. So what this means is, yes, you're charging schools for the program, but you still need a bit extra to run the organisation well. And so where can that money come from? And can we get a foundation in the area to sponsor something that already exists but isn't bringing in quite enough money? And oftentimes foundations like that schools are already paying for this, but they're just topping it up, as it were, to help your organization be sustainable. So the very last thing that we're going to look at quickly is maintaining focus. And we're going to look 5 years on, and Forever Families is now a £2 million a year organization with 50 staff. They turn their programs into a software service so they can make money in their sleep to sell to schools. Few schools bought it, but a corporation did, to help with staffing conflict at board level, and because they saw the similarities with nursery school students, and they ended up recommending it to their other peers, and brought in a huge amount of revenue. So Forever Families now works with 300 schools using the software, but they use it for free because it's sponsored by money made from selling to corporates. However, the analytics they have say the software is rarely used, and Tim spends his day managing a business and visits schools only twice a year. So oftentimes people look for technological solutions or curriculum-based solutions because they're the opportunity to make money in your sleep and diversify your product range. And sometimes they even look for more commercial solutions like this one here. And I think the challenge is, how do you investigate those solutions and bring that money in without it becoming a hindrance or a distraction from the core business? Because the question we have here is, where did it all go wrong? And 5 years previous, Tim couldn't have dreamt of running a £2 million organisation and would have been so excited about the idea, but here he is running it spending his entire day dealing with complaints from corporations, and knowing that schools aren't using his systems or services that he built for them. And so I think there are a number of questions we need to ask ourselves when looking at diversification, which are around strategic alignment, and obviously we'll send these slides over. Does it fit with the mission and brand, compromise charitable aims? Is it distinctive and competitive? What's the strength of the market opportunity? What's the potential profitability? What's the difficulty to implement? And what's the level of additional investment required? So if you are thinking about doing things beyond your core service, then is it realistic? Is it just going to be a distraction that holds you up and doesn't make you any additional money? Or is it going to make you so much additional money but take up so much of your time that you don't end up doing your core basics? And I think that that's one of the key risks to running a healthy, sustainable, well-balanced organization that also fulfills the mission that it was launched to deliver on. So I'm going to stop talking there and just see whether anyone has any questions or reflections or anything else they wanted to go through with Claire or I in the next 10 minutes before we wrap up. David, are you online? Did that resonate as something that you think is along the lines of where a lot of your members are and some of the key questions that they've got? Is there anything that we really missed from your point of view?
No, I think you gave a very important overview of the challenges facing practitioners in this environment. So I think that's a very good overview. Thank you very much, Jake. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before I wrap up the webinar?
No, I mean, I think one thing that I'd just like to offer is if there's anything that would be useful in addition in terms of some of the questions to ask. I can see Tina and Jane are typing in questions now, so I'll wait on those. But if there are any materials or samples that would be useful, then please do let us know and we can send over sample materials and things. I think we a question or two coming in, so we'll just wait on those. So Tina's asked about getting a copy of the health check model / assessment process, and we came up with something that would be useful to organisations in kind of comparative size and shape as some of the family lives organisations we've met. Or David, if you give us some guidance, or Tina, if you let us know the kind of size of organisations you're looking at, then we can come up with a kind of health check. I mean, really, if you're looking at more than 30% of your business coming from a single client, then that's something that I worry about. I'm less worried about 70, 80, 90% of your business coming from a single source, i.e. primary schools. But I think generally, if it's more than 30% from a single client, then it's not unhealthy, but you really need to just be aware of that and invest in that. So we'll send over some numbers. And Jane, I've seen you're asking about sending the pricings. So what we'll do is we will send over a few different kind of scenarios of where Tim's at and what different pricings would lead to him getting to, and what would work and what wouldn't, so that we can just spell those out. And if you'd like them comparative pricings for slightly bigger organizations or something, then do let us know and we can do something for a bigger organization. Yes, please, from Jennifer. Okay, so we can do that. It's asked about when working collaboratively as a way of diversifying, how do we ensure the other organization does not misuse your IP or materials? Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I think people would suggest having clear partnership guidelines at the start and being very clear about when and how they will use your organization's materials and IP and things. And a lot of the time we make the mistake of selling off our IP too cheap. But at the same time, I think generally, we're all here with the same mission, and I very rarely see IP or models really misused. And so there's two issues. There's one which is around quality assurance, which is how do you make sure they're used really well, which involves training and making sure that the person you're working with is the person who's delivering using your materials, because you don't want it to be 3 degrees of separation from you to the person delivering. And then there's another one which is kind of people ripping off your stuff and using it in their stuff, and that's something that you can't really prevent against unless you want to get the lawyers involved, and that's quite a lengthy and difficult process. So generally, my personal approach is to tend to be quite open, but as Tina's written here, getting the partnership agreements and MOUs up at the start is really valuable, and I think putting that extra time and effort in before any work gets going, rather than waiting until work's underway, so that you've got it down on a paper and things is really valuable. And maybe Tina, if you've got any on that and more experience, you might share that with Family Lives and anything that they might want to share around. David, have you seen anything at Family Lives around where there have been successful partnerships or challenges to partnerships with people ripping off models and things?
Well, I think, as you said, just getting, well, as Tina said, getting partnership agreements done at the very beginning is always a very good way to start things, so no one sort of has any misunderstandings about what you can expect from collaborations and things of that nature. So that's a very useful piece of advice.
And I think those kind of partnerships that, I referred to the example of, if you're a specialist with the nursery group, then finding someone who's a specialist with post-nursery primary school students is really valuable. I know that I set up an organization that works in the education space, working with secondary schools in the careers advice space. And forever we have schools begging us to work with other organizations in that space to offer a single package that they can just buy, because otherwise, from the point of view of the school, they're buying one small part of the careers service from us, one small part of the careers service from someone else, one small part from someone else. They're negotiating with everyone. They're having to do quality assurance across all these different organizations. And if you can shortcut that for them by going into business with people who offer comparative but slightly different products to you, so not direct competitors, but people with different specialities, and then coming to a school and saying, this is how we've got your whole parental engagement or behavioral management solution sorted, and it's these 3 organizations, and here are their respective CVs and endorsements, but we're going to offer you one price, one point of contact and things, really helps, with successful sales, because it really helps the school, because it saves them the headache of having to tender and procure across 3 different areas. They've just got one reliable provider, and they know that each of the members will keep each other in check. So I think looking at partnerships where you can pitch together and cross promote is really valuable, and it doesn't have to be an intensive formal partnership. It can be quite informal.
Thank you very much, Jake. I think that brings us to the end, unless there are any more questions. Doesn't appear to be. So, well, thank you all for joining us, and we hope it's been of use to you. Don't forget that the webinar has been recorded. Oh, actually, we might have Jennifer typing now. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. So it's going to be on our YouTube channel. So go to familylives.org.uk and click on the YouTube logo. And we'll also email the slides and other information used in this webinar to you all. So thank you again to Jake, and best of luck with all of your work.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. It's been a real pleasure to work with everyone at Family Lives.
Thank you very much.